Silvercrest awoke beneath a flawless blanket of freshly fallen snow. At dawn, the town's timbered rooftops glowed faintly in the pale pink light, and frost-wreathed pines stood silent guard on the surrounding ridges. A cold hush lay over the streets, broken only by the distant tinkling of ice-laden icicles and the crunch of boots along the boardwalk. It was the week of the mid-January Ice Festival, when lanterns would sway above Main Street and carved sculptures of frosted crystal would gleam in gilded hues. But on this morning, the festival was still a promise, and nature's beauty reigned supreme. High above the town, at the edge of the spruce forest, Ranger Lena Hayes prepared for her first patrol of the season. She drew on leather gloves, inhaled the sharp tang of pine needle and wood smoke, and adjusted the satchel of emergency rations at her hip. At her side stood Ember, the chestnut stallion she had raised since he was a colt. Ember's coat shone like burnished copper against the snow, and wisps of vapor curled from his nostrils as he blew soft huffs into the crisp air. His dark eyes, steady and intelligent, reflected Lena's own excitement at the pristine winter landscape. As Lena fitted Ember with his light leather harness and checked the climb boots strapped to her own feet, she murmured a quiet greeting. Ember responded with a gentle nicker, stamping one hoof to break the icy crust. The morning light slanted through the treetops, illuminating frosted spiderwebs clinging to low branches and sending shards of diamond-bright sparkle across the ground. It was in these first golden moments, Lena thought, that the mountains felt most like home. Their patrol followed the narrow trail that wound along the forest's edge, where snow-laden boughs arched overhead. Each tread left a crisp indentation. Lena's boots sank to mid-calf, Ember's hooves imprinted crisp crescent shapes. The stallion's sure-footed steps carried them up gentle inclines and across frozen trickles of creek, where the water beneath the ice whispered beneath its glassy veneer. Birds, jays and chickadees armed against the cold, flitted through the branches, their bright calls echoing in the silence. As they rode, Lena paused now and then to inspect the faint signs of wildlife, rabbit tracks crossing the path, the scat of a passing fox, and to note the condition of the snowpack on the steeper slopes above. All seemed peaceful. Ember, however, grew more alert with every ridge they passed. His ears flicked forward at sounds too distant for human ears, a subtle shift in wind, the sigh of settling snow. Lena trusted his instincts, for he had always sensed the subtlest tremors of mountain weather. By midday, they reached the open meadow overlooking Silvercrest. From this vantage, the town looked like a model village, smoke curling gently from chimneys, festival banners still furled against the eaves, and a single curling plume of steam rising from the bakery chimney. Lena dismounted and offered Ember a handful of oats. As he ate, she unhooked her binoculars and scanned the high ridgelines. The air was so clear she could see the ridge's serrated peaks etched sharply against a cloudless sky. For a moment, everything was perfect, a picture of winter's quiet majesty. Yet as Lena lowered her binoculars, Ember's ears stiffened again. He lifted his head, surveyed the upper slopes, and let out a low whinny. Across the meadow, the wind carried a faint, distant rumble, so soft Lena questioned if she'd imagined it. But Ember pawed the ground and stamped once more, eyes fixed on the drifting snow far above. In his silence lay a warning: in this frozen paradise, the mountains held their own power, and soon, Lena would learn how swiftly winter's wonder could turn to danger. A week of unbroken snowfall had turned Silvercrest's surrounding peaks into a vast, featureless white sea. Each dawn revealed another foot of powder on the trails, and the wind sculpted drifts into sharp crests that gleamed like glass in the pale winter light. Ranger Lena Hayes moved with deliberate care as she led Ember through the silent spruce forest, her breath puffing in quick, misty bursts. Every branch above sagged under snow's weight, every stump and boulder was buried deep, forcing Lena to follow Ember's hoofprints rather than her own. Lena paused at the mouth of a narrow ravine to check her avalanche probe and gauge the snowpack's stability. Her gloved hand pushed the steel rod into the soft powder until it struck the firmer layer beneath. Pulling it back, she noted a sudden drop, an unseen pocket of loose snow trapped between hard slabs. She frowned, marking the spot in her notebook. This chute had become a potential release zone. Ember shifted beside her, nostrils flaring as he examined the same slope with keen equine eyes. Further along, they passed a series of ranger-laid snares meant to monitor mountain hare populations. Lena paused at each trigger, resetting the spring-loaded hooks with precision. She whispered reassurances to Ember, "Good boy," steady footing, all the while scanning for cracked snow or dilated fissures. The forest felt deceptively calm, no cracking branches, no sloughs of powder dislodging. Yet each second the wind rattled through the trees felt like the breath before a storm's roar. It came without warning. Ember froze mid-step, his ears pricked forward and nostrils quivering, as a deep, resonant rumble rolled down from the distant ridge. It wasn't thunder, but the low, guttural sound of tons of snow shifting on ice, an avalanche's prelude. Lena's heart lurched. She raised her voice to call Ember's name, but her words were swallowed by the storm's hush. The stallion pawed the packed trail, pressed his shoulder into her thigh, and whinnied sharply, eyes locked on the blind crest above. Lena swung her gaze upward just as the first shards of ice and powder burst free, tumbling down in a jagged curtain of white. In that instant, she knew how swiftly the mountains could change. The serene beauty of this frozen realm had hardened into a lethal force. Ember stamped again, agitated, as the distant roar subsided into a rolling echo. Lena's blood pounded in her ears as she realized the danger that threatened Silvercrest and how urgently she and Ember would need to warn the town before the next slide struck without mercy. A night fell over Silvercrest under a curtain of driving snow, swallowing the town in near-total darkness. Lanterns swung in the stiff wind, casting trembling pools of light on drifts that piled against doorways. Lena Hayes raced down Main Street toward the power switch box by the town hall, Ember padding faithfully at her side through the knee-deep snow. Each step was a battle. Icy flakes stung her face, and the village's familiar grid of streets had become an indistinct maze of white. She fumbled at the switchbox's latch, expecting the comforting hum of transformers, but found it ominously silent. Panic roared in her chest as she pried open the door. The main power line had snapped under the weight of falling snow and ice, severing the town's lifeline in an instant. No street lamps. No siren. No warnings would pierce the night. Lena's breath came in frantic puffs. Behind her, Ember stamped anxiously, ears flattened. Somewhere up the mountain, another slide must already be gathering force. She fished out her emergency lantern only to discover the battery pack was frozen solid. Darkness pressed in around them. "Fall back," she whispered to Ember, though neither of them needed telling twice. They fought their way back toward the stables, Lena's headlamp disgorging a narrow beam through the storm. Snowdrifts blocked the road by the bakery, fallen pines lay like giant ribs across Silvercrest's arteries. No villagers were patrolling the streets. Everyone had retreated indoors when the first rumble shook the town. Reaching the stable doors, Lena fumbled a key from her pocket. Ember pawed at the wood, nuzzling her arm as though urging her to hurry. Inside, the drafts hissed between stalls, and the horses stirred uneasily. Lena unhooked Ember's halter and slipped his saddlecloth and emergency pack onto his broad back. She tied the pack's straps tightly, packed with medical supplies, a flare gun, and the mayor's emergency protocol binder. She knelt to Ember's level, pressing her forehead to his velvety muzzle. "You understand what we must do," she murmured. Ember gave a low, urgent nicker, his dark eyes shining with fierce intelligence. Lena knew the town's siren towers were useless now, and every second counted. The next avalanche could send a wall of snow roaring down into Silvercrest before dawn. She threw her leg over Ember's bare back, sliding into the stirrups as the wind slammed against her chest. The stallion's muscles flexed beneath her, his breath fumed in great white clouds. Lena dug her heels gently into his flanks. Without a word, Ember sprang forward into the storm, hooves clipping a steady rhythm through the swirling drifts. Lena clenched the flare gun under her arm and held the protocol binder against her thigh. Each leap of Ember's powerful shoulders carried them farther from the stables and closer to the valley road, and to the house of Mayor Whitcomb at the foot of the mountain. Behind them, the wind howled through the empty stalls, as if the very spirit of Silvercrest implored them to hurry. As the town faded into the swirling white, Lena felt Ember lift his head and break into a gallop. They would outrun the darkness if not the avalanche itself, and lightning-quick warnings would flash through the fallen hamlet thanks to one brave ranger and her heroic horse. Ember's hooves thundered against the packed snow as Lena urged him faster, the flare gun strapped at her side and the mayor's protocol binder tucked under her arm. The wind had sharpened into a gale, flinging icy needles of snow that stung Lena's cheeks and obscured her vision in swirling white. Behind them, a deep, rolling roar grew steadily louder, an avalanche, building momentum on the mountain's steep flank. They veered off the main trail, cutting across a frozen meadow dotted with sentinel pines weighed down by drifts. Ember sprang over fallen logs and leapt across narrow ravines where the snow had carved natural gullies. Each bound felt miraculous, his powerful muscles coiling and releasing like springs under Lena's quiet commands. Lena peered over Ember's shoulder. In the distance, she could just make out the wavering glow of the mayor's house lanterns. Snow whipped around her, and the roar behind them had crescendoed into a bone-shaking thunder. She reached for the binder and tore out the emergency warning sheet, the paper crackling in her gloved hand. With a single smooth motion, she fumbled open the flare gun's breech, loaded the red flare, and locked it into place. As they crested a small rise, Mayor Whitcomb's daughter, Clara, stepped out onto the front porch, lantern held aloft. Lena reined Ember in beside the low stone wall and shouted above the wind, "Mayor Whitcomb! Avalanche! Evacuate to the mine shaft now!" Before Clara could respond, Lena fired the flare skyward. The flare arced through the gray-white storm, trailing a flaming red plume before bursting overhead in a blaze of warning. Clara's eyes widened with recognition. She dropped the lantern and raced back inside, banging on the heavy door. Down the snow-choked street, lights flicked on behind curtained windows, and the distant clang of the town bell began its urgent peal. Meanwhile, Ember pawed at the ground, steam rising from his flanks. Lena stroked his neck, her voice calm but commanding. "They know. Let's move." With that, Ember plunged onward, carrying Lena away from the collapsing slope. Behind them, the avalanche slammed into the lower ridges with earth-shaking force, sending a wall of roaring snow tumbling across the valley floor. By the time Lena and Ember reached the safety of the mine entrance, the first of the villagers, bundled in coats and scarves, were filing in, guided by lantern light and Clara's cries. The old steel door closed behind the last evacuees just as the avalanche thundered past, burying the approach road under 20 feet of ice and rock. Inside the mine's cool, echoing chamber, Lena finally exhaled. She rubbed Ember's neck, feeling his warmth and steadiness beneath her trembling hand. Around them, the townspeople huddled together, faces pale but relieved. Outside, Silvercrest lay blanketed in snow, and yet, thanks to one brave horse and his rider's quick thinking, the heart of the town still beat strong. The first light of morning filtered through the narrow mine tunnel and spilled onto the huddled townspeople. Lanterns were extinguished as each face turned toward the mouth of the cavern, where the gray dawn revealed Silvercrest buried under a blanket of snow 20 feet deep. Silence reigned for a long moment, then came a murmur of relief and wonder that swelled into grateful applause. Lena led Ember from the mine's entrance, boots crunching on the fresh snow. Ember paused at the threshold, nostrils flaring as he surveyed the transformed landscape. Every rooftop, fence post, and tree was lost beneath wind-sculpted drifts. The main road into town had vanished entirely. Yet not a single life had been lost. Mayor Whitcomb stood on the frozen porch of his house, now a knee-deep mound of ice and shale, cheering as Lena approached. He embraced his daughter Clara, then knelt to hug Lena. "You and Ember saved us," he said, voice thick with gratitude. "No siren, no warning, just you and your brave horse." From the gathered crowd came the sounds of shovels digging paths toward doorsteps, neighbors helping neighbors uncover homes, and children forming snowplow lines with sleds and makeshift scoops. Lena watched with pride as Ember nickered encouragement, his breath forging little clouds in the cold air. At the edge of Main Street, where the avalanche had roared down just hours before, townsfolk erected a simple wooden plaque, in honor of Ember and Ranger Hayes, who raced through the storm to deliver our salvation. Clara placed a wreath of pine boughs and holly on the plaque, then presented Ember with a woven garland of red berries draped across his chest. Ember stamped his hoof in proud acknowledgement. As the day warmed and the sun climbed higher, Silvercrest's people prepared to dig out their buried homes. Lena and Ember joined the effort, lending strength to the shoveling lines and moral support to tired hands. Every time someone paused to rest, Ember would gently nuzzle them, and Lena would remind them, "Remember how we outran the Avalanche together?" When the festival lanterns were finally hung that evening, they glowed not just in celebration of winter's beauty, but in honor of resilience, courage, and an unbreakable bond between a ranger and her horse. And high above, the snowy peaks stood silent once more, watchful, majestic, and at peace.